The void of space was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. Admiral Dorian Raines stood at the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching the tactical display flicker with the positions of enemy vessels. The Galactic Dominion had thought humanity was weak. They thought Earth was just another world to conquer, another species to subjugate. They were about to learn otherwise. The Dominion had been at war with the Turalis, a reptilian species with an empire spanning hundreds of systems, for centuries. It had been a slow, grinding conflict. Battles were fought over the same systems, back and forth, like an eternal game of cosmic chess. But when the Dominion turned its eyes toward Sul, demanding humanity's submission, they had made a fatal miscalculation. Humans did not submit. Humans adapted. Humans fought. The war had started with skirmishes, pirate attacks, ships disappearing near colony worlds. Then came the blockade on Mars. The Dominion thought it would be over quickly, but they hadn't counted on humanity's sheer, relentless will to survive. Now, Earth was answering in full force. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Nathan Solis from his station. "The Dominion fleet is holding steady in the Lagrange Point. Defensive formation. Looks like they think they're ready for us." Admiral Raines smirked. "Then let's show them how wrong they are." The human fleet moved in like a storm. Sleek, dark warships, their hulls coated with adaptive camouflage, shifting to the darkness of space. Dominion sensors, tuned to detect energy signatures and movement, struggled to keep up. By the time they realized the attack had begun, it was already too late. The first wave was brutal. HSS Fury, HSS Nemesis, and HSS Warhammer led the charge. Kinetic rounds, traveling at relativistic speeds, punched through Dominion shields like wet paper. Plasma bursts lanced out, cutting through enemy formations. A Dominion cruiser exploded, its debris scattering into the void. They had never seen anything like it. Humanity's technology wasn't the most advanced in the galaxy. Their ships weren't the largest. But they were fast. They were unpredictable. And most importantly, they fought with the kind of brutal efficiency that the Dominion, accustomed to slow, drawn-out wars, had never encountered before. The Dominion flagship, Trelax Honor, sent out a desperate distress signal. Reinforcements were already en route, but the message was clear. They weren't going to last that long. Raines stood unmoving, his eyes locked onto the holographic display. "Bring the railguns online," he ordered. The Retribution's massive twin railguns powered up. The Dominion had seen energy weapons before. They had seen torpedoes. But they had never faced something like this. Humanity's railguns were devastatingly simple. Massive slugs accelerated to unimaginable speeds, tearing through enemy ships with raw kinetic force. The first shot fired. A Dominion battleship in the center of their formation took the hit straight through its core. A second later, it was gone, reduced to a field of expanding wreckage. Panic spread through the enemy fleet. Their formations broke apart. Dominion officers, trained in hierarchy and rigid tactics, were not prepared for an opponent who could read their movements and counter them with brutal, calculated aggression. "Admiral," Solis called again, his voice laced with disbelief. "They're retreating." Raines folded his arms, watching as the enemy fleet scattered. Some tried to run. Others simply surrendered, shutting down their weapons and broadcasting distress signals. A minute. That's all it had taken. "Let them run," Raines said coldly, "but make sure the message gets out. Earth is not to be trifled with." The battle was over. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Dominion's retreat sent shockwaves across the galactic front. Fleets that had once feared nothing now scrambled to reassess their strategies. The news spread like wildfire. Humanity wasn't just another minor species. They were something far worse, an enemy that didn't fight like the rest of the galaxy. They fought to win. On board the HSS Retribution, Admiral Dorian Raines stood before the massive holographic display in the war room. His officers gathered around. The battle had been a resounding success, but he knew this was only the beginning. Commander Nathan Solis was the first to break the silence. They won't take this loss lightly. We humiliated them. Their honor demands retaliation. Raines nodded, his expression grim. Exactly, and that's why we don't wait for them to hit back. He turned to Major Lillian Carter, the head of intelligence operations. What do we know about their nearest command centers? Carter, a hardened officer with years of Black Ops experience, tapped a few commands into her tablet. The display zoomed in on the star system Velka 9, a heavily fortified Dominion outpost. Velka 9 is their strongest forward base in this region. If they want to strike back, this is where they'll regroup. Then we hit them first, Raines said. We send a message loud and clear. Earth doesn't wait for the storm. We are the storm. A murmur of agreement rippled through the officers. This was how humanity fought. They didn't play defense. They took the fight to the enemy. Solis, still analyzing the data, frowned. Velka 9 isn't just a military outpost. Civilians live there. Dominion loyalists, sure, but also refugees and non-combatants. Raines exhaled slowly. The room grew silent. This was war, but humanity wasn't a race of conquerors. They didn't slaughter indiscriminately like the Dominion had when they raised colonies on the outer rim. We target only military assets, he said firmly. If we cripple their command structure, the civilians won't even be a factor. We do this clean. Carter nodded, but there was a glint of something else in her eyes. She had seen too many wars, knew too well that there was no such thing as a clean fight. The next few hours were a blur of planning and coordination. The fleet moved swiftly, navigating through slipstream corridors to arrive at Velka 9 undetected. The Dominion had barely begun regrouping when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. It was an ambush unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Stealth bombers bypassed defenses before their sensors even registered the attack. Railgun rounds ripped through supply stations, severing the Dominion's logistical backbone. Precision strikes disabled communications, cutting Velka 9 off from the rest of the fleet. By the time Dominion forces scrambled to respond, it was already over. The HSS Retribution hovered ominously over the shattered remnants of the station. A transmission request came through. The face of a Dominion admiral appeared on the screen, his reptilian features twisted in rage. "You dare strike us like cowards?" he snarled. "You hide in the dark, strike from the shadows. This is not war. This is dishonor." Raines leaned forward, his voice ice cold. "You misunderstand us, Admiral. We don't care about honor. We care about winning." The transmission cut out. The Dominion knew now. Humanity was not just another species to be bullied and conquered. They were a predator, and the hunt had just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Velka 9 in ruins, its once proud Dominion stronghold reduced to little more than scattered wreckage. Fires still burned in the remnants of its command center, though there was little left to salvage. The Dominion had underestimated humanity again, and it had cost them dearly. Admiral Raines stood at the observation deck of the HSS Retribution, watching as salvage drones scoured the remains for anything useful. The battle had been swift, decisive, surgical as planned. But he knew it wouldn't be the last. Commander Nathan Solis approached, his expression unreadable. The Dominion fleet isn't responding to distress calls from Velka 9. Either they're too afraid to face us, or they're planning something bigger. Raines folded his arms. We've backed them into a corner. The next move will be desperation. Major Lillian Carter's voice cut through the bridge's comms. Admiral, we just intercepted a transmission from deep within Dominion space. Let's hear it. Carter's face appeared on the main screen, her features tight with concern. The Dominion High Command just declared us a Category Omega threat. That's their highest classification, reserved for species deemed existential dangers. Silence filled the room. Everyone understood what that meant. Solus exhaled. So, they're calling for total war. Carter nodded. Every fleet, every soldier, every weapon they have. They'll throw everything at us. Rains wasn't surprised. He had anticipated this reaction, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. The Dominion had fought other wars before, but never against an enemy like humanity. They had never fought against an opponent who learned, who adapted, who fought not just with strength, but with ruthless, calculated aggression. They think they can drown us in numbers, Rains said, turning back toward the void outside. They don't realize that we don't fight like them. We don't play by their rules. Solus nodded, though there was a shadow of doubt in his expression. Even so, Admiral, this isn't just a fleet anymore. This is the entire Dominion war machine. We're talking about hundreds of battle groups, millions of soldiers, weapons we haven't even seen before. We'll fight smarter, Rains said simply, and we'll fight harder. Carter tapped at her console. That's not the worst part. Our spies have confirmed that the Dominion is reaching out to the other major empires. They're trying to rally the entire galactic community against us. That was the real problem. Humanity had just made its mark in the galaxy, and already they were being painted as a threat to every other species. If the Dominion succeeded in convincing the neutral factions to join their war, Earth wouldn't be facing a single empire. They would be facing the combined might of the galaxy. A lesser species might have surrendered, might have tried to negotiate, to find a diplomatic way out. But humans weren't wired that way. Rains turned to his officers, his voice carrying a quiet steel. We send a message of our own. Solus arched an eyebrow. And what's that? We show them why making an enemy of Earth is the last mistake they'll ever make. Across the fleet, the order went out. War preparations began. Humanity would not be crushed. Humanity would conquer. The Dominion wasted no time. Within days of the Velka 9 massacre, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Entire battle groups were being mobilized, fleets stretching for light years converging toward human-occupied space. The Dominion had called for total war, and the galaxy had answered. Admiral Rains stood in the command center of the HSS Retribution, staring at the vast network of enemy movements projected onto the holotable. Red dots swarmed like a plague, each one representing a fleet hell-bent on humanity's destruction. Commander Nathan Solus exhaled sharply beside him. We're looking at a coalition of over 12 species. The Dominion pulled every favor they had. Even the Teralis, their sworn enemies, have agreed to a temporary alliance to wipe us out. Rains wasn't surprised. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had introduced fear into a galaxy that had long thought itself superior, and nothing united old enemies like fear. Major Carter's voice came through the tactical channel. Sir, intelligence confirms the main fleet is massing near the Trion Expanse. If they push through, they'll reach our outer colonies within a week. Solus ran a hand through his hair. We can't stop a force that large in open battle. Even with all our tech, all our tactics, they'll overwhelm us. Rains remained silent for a moment. Then he looked up. We don't fight them in open battle. Solus frowned. Then how? We bleed them, Rains said. We don't let them bring the war to us. We take the war to them. A slow grin spread across Carter's face. "You're talking about hit and run." "Not just hit and run," Rains clarified. "Total disruption. We don't just attack them, we cripple them. We cut supply lines, sabotage their command networks, turn every planet between here and Earth into a death trap. They think they're marching toward victory, but by the time they get here, they'll be broken." Solus let out a low chuckle. "Guerrilla warfare, but on a galactic scale." Rains nodded. "It's what humans do best." The plan was set in motion immediately. Strike teams were deployed to enemy supply routes, planting sleeper agents and sabotage cells within key logistics hubs. Covert operations hit Dominion fuel depots, causing critical shortages before battles could even begin. Stealth fleets harassed the enemy's long-range scouts, making it impossible for them to get accurate intelligence. And then, the real attacks began. At Zeltrak Station, the Dominion's primary resupply point, human infiltrators disabled automated defenses minutes before an assault fleet arrived. Explosions ripped through the station's infrastructure, and before the enemy could even mount a counterattack, the humans were gone. At Bax 5, an industrial world supplying Dominion warships, a series of accidents triggered catastrophic chain reactions in their primary shipyards. Within hours, hundreds of vessels were reduced to burning husks. At Veloc Prime, one of the Dominion's key communications hubs, cyber warfare teams unleashed a digital plague that caused confusion and miscommunication among the coalition forces. Battle plans were scrambled, reinforcements were misrouted, and in some cases, Dominion ships fired on each other. The galaxy had never seen war waged like this. The Dominion, so used to drawn-out battles fought with honor and predictable tactics, found itself flailing against an invisible enemy. Humanity didn't fight with brute force. They fought with relentless ingenuity. And then came the real turning point. A Dominion Dreadnought, the Vector, carrying a high-ranking war council, was en route to the front lines. It was a mobile fortress, supposedly untouchable. But the humans had other plans. A single stealth corvette, HSS Phantom, managed to slip past the Dominion escort. Aboard it were some of the most elite soldiers humanity had ever trained. They boarded the Vector, cutting through the ship's defenses like ghosts in the dark. Within an hour, the Dominion's war council lay dead, their throats slit in their own war room. By the time the Dominion even realized what had happened, the HSS Phantom was long gone. Panic gripped the coalition. Leaders hesitated. Fleets stalled. For the first time, the war machine ground to a halt, not because of superior firepower, but because the enemy had shattered their confidence. Solus stood beside Rains as they watched the latest battle reports. "They don't know what to do," he said with a grin. "They're used to fighting armies. They don't know how to fight an idea." Rains smirked. "That's because they don't understand what they're up against." Solus folded his arms. "And what's that?" Rains turned, his expression cold and unwavering. "They're fighting humans." The Dominion's war machine was grinding to a halt, but not because of a lack of resources or reinforcements. No, the true enemy wasn't starvation, nor was it attrition. It was uncertainty. The enemy no longer knew where to strike. Every time they massed their forces for a decisive push, their supply lines mysteriously collapsed. Every time they attempted to regroup, their fleet commanders wound up dead, their warships sabotaged. They were fighting ghosts. Admiral Rains stood at the helm of the HSS Retribution, watching the endless sea of stars before him. Reports from intelligence were clear. The Dominion was stalling. Their coalition allies were second-guessing their commitment. The Teralis, always opportunists, had pulled back their fleets, unwilling to suffer more casualties. The Vorlun hierarchy, once eager to prove their loyalty to the Dominion, were now losing ships faster than they could replace them. But the Dominion itself, they were still holding on. Barely. Commander Nathan Solis stepped up beside him. "We've bled them, Admiral. They're disorganized, demoralized. One more strike, one decisive blow, and we could end this." Rains exhaled. "And what's your suggestion?" Solis tapped on the holo display. The star map zoomed in on a single point. Primaris 1, the Dominion's true homeworld. Not just a military hub, but the beating heart of their empire. "You want to take the war to their capital?" Rains asked, raising an eyebrow. Solis nodded. "They think we're just hit-and-run raiders. They assume we'll stay in the shadows. But if we strike Primaris 1, if we cripple them where it hurts, they'll have no choice but to surrender." Major Carter chimed in through the comms. "He's right. If we destroy their leadership, the Dominion collapses. No one else in the coalition will keep fighting without them." Rains studied the hologram for a long moment. This was it. The final move in the game. The Dominion had declared total war. Now, humanity would finish it. "We do it," he said finally. "We take the capital, and we end this war." The battle for Primaris 1 began with fire and fury. The HSS Retribution led the charge, emerging from slipstream space with the full force of humanity's combined fleet. The Dominion had fortified the system, deploying dozens of battle groups and planetary defenses. But none of that mattered. The humans didn't fight fair. Electronic warfare teams hijacked enemy communications, feeding them false orders. Dominion fleets turned against each other in the chaos, mistaking allies for enemies. Precision orbital strikes hammered key infrastructure, cutting off power grids, command centers, and planetary shields. And then the ground invasion began. Elite human shock troops deployed across the capital city of Vecta Prime, where the Dominion's ruling war council had barricaded themselves in the Citadel of Lords. The Dominion, once a proud empire of conquerors, now found itself under siege. Nathan Solis led the assault himself, cutting through the last of the Dominion's defenders. He and his strike team breached the War Council's chambers, weapons raised. The Dominion lords, once so arrogant and untouchable, now cowered before them. One of them, a high-ranking warlord, hissed through his fanged maw. This is impossible. We are the Dominion. You are lesser than us." Solis leveled his rifle at the alien's head. "Not anymore." A single shot rang out. Admiral Rains watched from orbit as the Dominion's surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. Their once mighty empire brought to its knees, not by sheer numbers, not by superior firepower, but by ruthless strategy. The war was over. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as a minor player, not as another species to be pushed around, but as a force to be feared. And the galaxy would never forget. The war was over, but peace was not guaranteed. The Dominion's surrender sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Their once mighty fleets drifted aimlessly, leaderless and fractured. Their allies, once so eager to fight humanity, now scrambled to distance themselves from the losing side. Some worlds rejoiced in the fall of their oppressors. Others feared what would come next. Humanity had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. But now, the real question remained. What would they do with their victory? Admiral Rains sat alone in his private quarters aboard the HSS Retribution, staring at the latest reports. Across former Dominion space, revolts had erupted. Entire colonies that had once been enslaved were rising up, purging their former overlords. Some called for independence, others called for revenge, and some called for human rule. A soft chime rang through the cabin. The door slid open, revealing Major Carter. She saluted sharply before stepping inside. "We have a problem, sir," she said. Rains set down his datapad. Just one? Carter didn't smile. More like a dozen. Reports are coming in from the outer Dominion sectors. Some of their military governors refuse to acknowledge the surrender. They've declared themselves warlords, rallying whatever fleets they have left. Rains exhaled. Of course they have. Carter hesitated. And there's something else. The coalition is uneasy. The same species that were once willing to fight us now see us as the next galactic superpower. Some are already whispering that humanity is the new threat. Rains leaned back in his chair. He had expected this. No empire simply won a war and walked away without consequences. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. But fear was a fragile thing. It could turn into respect, or it could turn into hatred. Before he could respond, the intercom crackled. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Terran High Council, Priority 1. Rains glanced at Carter, then nodded. "Patch it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Chancellor Elias Monroe, Earth's highest-ranking political leader. His expression was unreadable. "Admiral Rains," Monroe said, his voice measured. "Congratulations on your victory." Rains inclined his head. "Thank you, sir." Monroe's eyes darkened. "But I'm afraid we have little time to celebrate. The Dominion is broken but not destroyed. Rogue warlords are already rallying their forces, and worse, the galactic community sees us as an unstable power. If we don't act swiftly, we risk another war before this one is even cold." Rains understood. "What's the Council's decision?" Monroe took a deep breath. "We occupy the Dominion's core worlds. We stabilize the region under human governance." Carter's eyes widened slightly. Even Rains felt the weight of those words. "You want us to rule them?" Rains asked carefully. "Temporarily," Monroe clarified. "We don't have to hold their entire empire, just the key systems. If we don't, another power will, and the last thing we need is another galactic warlord rising up to finish what the Dominion started." Rains folded his arms. "And what happens when we do take control? Do we leave? Do we stay? How long before humanity becomes just another empire?" Monroe's face was unreadable. "That depends on what happens next." The transmission cut out. Carter exhaled. "We just won the war, and now we're about to start something bigger." Rains nodded slowly. He knew what came next wouldn't be about battles or fleets. It would be about power, and power had a way of changing everything. The occupation of the Dominion's core worlds began swiftly. Humanity moved with surgical precision, deploying fleets to strategic locations, securing vital infrastructure, and ensuring that no warlord could rise from the ashes of the shattered empire. At first, the remnants of the Dominion fought back. Scattered military units, desperate to reclaim their lost glory, launched ambushes against human patrols. Terrorist cells, fueled by hatred for their new rulers, detonated explosives in key government centers. But none of it was enough. The Terran forces had fought too long, too hard, to be undone by desperate insurgents. For every attack, humanity responded with overwhelming force. For every rebellion, there was swift retaliation. Admiral Rains oversaw the operation from the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as his soldiers secured one Dominion world after another. Commander Solis stepped up beside him. "Most of their resistance is broken," he said. "The few warlords left are fighting each other more than they're fighting us." Rains studied the holodisplay. Dominion space, once a chaotic mess of civil war, was slowly stabilizing, under human control. "And the rest of the galaxy?" Rains asked. Solis hesitated. "They're watching. The Teralis, the Vorlon, the other species who once backed the Dominion. They're nervous. Some think we'll become conquerors. Others think we'll collapse under our own weight." Rains sighed. And what do you think? Solis smirked. I think we just put ourselves at the center of the galactic stage, and everyone's waiting to see what we do next. In the halls of the Dominion's former capital, Vecta Prime, humanity's occupation was beginning to take shape. Major Carter walked through the newly established command center, watching as Terran officials worked to organize the planet's shattered government. Former Dominion administrators, now forced to work under human oversight, muttered bitterly as they compiled planetary reports. Armed soldiers stood watch over them, ensuring compliance. A Dominion governor, a reptilian creature known as High Speaker Keltar Ven, sat before her, his scaled face contorted in barely suppressed rage. "This is not governance," Keltar spat. "This is occupation." Carter leaned forward. "That's because it is an occupation." Keltar let out a low growl. "And how long do you think you can hold it? The galaxy will not allow humanity to seize control of our empire. You may have won the war, but you cannot hold on to victory forever." Carter's expression was cold. "We don't need to hold it forever. Just long enough to make sure the right people are in charge when we leave." Keltar narrowed his eyes. "And who decides who is right?" Carter smiled. "We do." Despite human control over Dominion space, threats still loomed. Deep in the uncharted regions of the galaxy, something watched. A shadowy figure stood aboard a darkened command bridge, its form obscured by swirling mist. Behind it, a group of hooded figures murmured in an alien tongue. "The humans have proven themselves formidable," one voice said. "They have accomplished what none before them could." "They are dangerous," another agreed, "but they are also reckless. Their empire is built on force, not stability." A third voice, older and colder, spoke last. "Then let us ensure they never find stability. Let us remind them that in the darkness of the void there are things far older and far deadlier than them." The hooded figures nodded in unison, and the shadows moved. Back on Vecta Prime, Admiral Rains stood on the balcony of the former Dominion Palace, overlooking the city below. Human banners flew where Dominion emblems once stood. Armed patrols moved through the streets. The once mighty empire of conquerors now lived under human rule. Solis stepped beside him. "So, what now?" Rains didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the stars, knowing that their victory had only led to greater dangers. The war had ended, but the next battle was just beginning. The shadows moved unseen, whispering through the void between the stars. Humanity had conquered the Dominion, but something far older had been watching. And now, it was moving. Admiral Rains sat in his command chamber aboard the HSS Retribution, reviewing intelligence reports. The Dominion's remaining forces were either surrendering or tearing each other apart. The occupation was holding, for now, but the weight of their victory was already pressing down on him. Commander Solis entered the chamber without a word, dropping a datapad onto the table. His expression was grim. Rains picked up the datapad. "What am I looking at?" Solis folded his arms. "A pattern. One we shouldn't be seeing." The report contained star maps marked with strange anomalies. At first glance, they looked like nothing, just deep space disturbances, unexplored voids. But the more Rains studied them, the more he saw the truth. "These systems," Rains muttered. "They're dying." Solis nodded. Sensors picked up something strange in multiple Dominion territories. Planets with sudden mass extinctions, orbital stations going completely dark, entire fleets disappearing. No distress calls, no debris, just gone. Rains leaned forward. "Are we dealing with a rogue faction?" Solis hesitated. "We don't think this is Dominion-related, sir. Some of these star systems weren't even occupied, and yet something erased them." A chill ran down Raines's spine. The Dominion had been a brutal empire, but they had been predictable. This question mark. This was something else. Where was the last incident? Raines asked. Solus tapped the datapad. A single name appeared. Zelvaris 4, a fringe colony world deep in former Dominion space. No communications for over a week, Solus said. It was supposed to be a minor refueling station. Population of 600,000. Our scouts sent a probe. Raines glanced up. And? Solus hesitated before swiping on the datapad. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage from the probe. At first, nothing but static. Then, darkness. The planet below was eerily silent, covered in deep black scars. No lights, no movement. Cities were still intact, yet lifeless. No visible damage, but every building looked wrong, as if something had emptied them. Then the footage cut to black. That was the last transmission, Solus said. After that, the probe was gone. Raines set the datapad down slowly. This isn't a rebellion, he said. No, Solus agreed. This is something else. Raines clenched his jaw. He had spent his career fighting enemies he could understand. The Dominion, for all their cruelty, had been alive. But whatever this was, it felt like death itself. The HSS Revenant arrived at Zelvaris 4 within the week. It was one of humanity's best reconnaissance vessels, outfitted with stealth tech and deep space sensors. Major Carter led the team personally, landing in one of the colony's main cities. She stepped out of the dropship, pulse rifle in hand, her boots crunching against the eerily silent streets. The city was untouched, but empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Doors were left open, meals half-eaten on tables. It was as if the entire colony had simply vanished. Jesus, one of her soldiers muttered. This is worse than a battlefield. Carter kept moving, scanning the area. Then she stopped. Her HUD flickered. A whisper echoed in her helmet. A strange, static-filled voice. You are not ready. Then the lights above flickered, and the shadows began to move. Back on the HSS Retribution, alarms blared. Sir, an officer shouted. We just lost contact with the Revenant. One moment they were there, and then nothing. Raines shot up from his seat. Get me visuals. The screen flickered. At first, nothing but static. Then, an image, a single frame, the ruins of Zelvaris 4, and something standing in the center of the city. Tall, featureless, blacker than space itself. Watching. The transmission cut. Silence fell across the bridge. Then, slowly, Solus exhaled. Admiral, he said quietly. What the hell did we just wake up? The silence that followed was thick with tension. The bridge crew of the HSS Retribution remained frozen, staring at the dark screen where the last image of Zelvaris 4 had played. Admiral Raines felt the weight settle in his gut. He had fought wars, seen entire fleets reduced to wreckage, watched civilizations crumble under orbital bombardments. But this was something else. This was an enemy he couldn't see, and it had just wiped out one of his best teams. Solus exhaled sharply. Orders, sir? Raines's mind raced. The smart move, the logical move, was to pull back, report this anomaly to the Terran High Council, and let scientists and analysts break it down. But Major Carter was down there. His soldiers were down there. He wasn't leaving them behind. Prep a recon team, Raines ordered. We're going to Zelvaris 4. Solus tensed. Sir, we don't even know what we're up against. Raines met his gaze. Then it's time we found out. Hours later, the HSS Revenant 2, a heavily armed infiltration cruiser, descended into the dead skies of Zelvaris 4. The storm clouds above were unnatural, black, twisting, alive. The sensors struggled to penetrate the haze, but Raines didn't need a perfect reading. He could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong here. Aboard the dropship, the retrieval team double-checked their weapons. Experimental plasma rifles, motion trackers, and enough explosives to level a city block. "Remember," Rains said over the comms, "this isn't a rescue mission. We don't know if anyone's left alive." The dropship doors slid open, revealing the ruins of the city below. And the emptiness. Buildings stood intact. Vehicles remained parked along the streets. Streetlights flickered in eerie, rhythmic pulses. But there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a city abandoned in an instant. The team moved forward cautiously. "Eyes up," Solus muttered, scanning the rooftops. "This place feels like a goddamn grave." Rains gritted his teeth. It wasn't a grave. A grave had bodies. This was worse. They found the HSS Revenant near the city center, untouched but eerily silent. The ship's exterior was fine. No battle scars, no forced entry. Yet the crew was missing. Rains stepped inside, rifle raised. The interior was intact, but the air was thick with something unnatural. The lights flickered. Shadows seemed longer than they should have been, and in the command center, a single message had been scrawled across the walls in black, tar-like fluid. "They are not dead. They were taken." Rains felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Then his comm crackled. "Sir," came a shaky voice, "you need to see this." Rains followed the signal to a side alley. A single figure stood in the shadows, helmet cracked, armor scorched. Major Carter. Alive. But when she turned, Rains saw her eyes. They weren't hers anymore, and she started to whisper in a voice that wasn't her own. "They are awake." The air in the alley grew colder as Major Carter's voice rasped through the comms, unnatural and layered, as though something ancient spoke through her. "They are awake." Admiral Rains tightened his grip on his rifle, his instincts screaming at him to fire, to end whatever this was. But this was Carter. One of his best. He couldn't. Not yet. "Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the dread clawing at him. "What's happening? Who's awake?" Her head tilted unnaturally, her blank, hollow eyes locking onto his. "The ones who came before. The ones who wait beyond. You woke them when you tore the Dominion apart." Commander Solis stepped forward, his weapon trained on her. "Admiral, she's not herself. We need to—" Before he could finish, the ground trembled. A low, resonant hum pulsed through the city, vibrating in their bones. The shadows around them stretched and twisted, no longer bound by the laws of light or physics. From the edges of the streets, tall, featureless figures emerged, blacker than the void, their forms shifting like liquid darkness. Rains barked into his comms. "All units, fall back to the dropship, now!" The team didn't hesitate. They opened fire as they retreated, plasma rounds tearing into the figures. The shots seemed to dissipate into nothingness, swallowed by the entity's forms. The hum grew louder, drowning out the sound of gunfire. Carter didn't move. She stood there, whispering as the shadows closed in. Rains grabbed Solis. "We're not leaving her." "Sir, she's gone!" Solis shouted, pulling back. "Look at her!" But Rains didn't listen. He charged forward, slamming into Carter and dragging her toward the dropship. Her body was limp, but her lips kept moving, muttering incomprehensible words. The entities surged after them, faster now. The city itself seemed to warp, buildings bending inward, streets cracking as though reality was unraveling. The dropship engines roared to life as the team piled in. Rains threw Carter inside just as one of the shadow figures reached for him. Solis fired a point-blank plasma burst, and for a split second, the entity recoiled, enough time for the doors to slam shut. "Get us out of here," Rains roared. The dropship shot into the sky, the HSS Revenant II waiting above. Behind them, Zelvaris 4 shuddered. The black scars on its surface spread like a disease, consuming the planet. Then, in an instant, it vanished, not destroyed, not shattered, but gone, as if it had never existed. Back aboard the HSS Retribution, the crew worked frantically to stabilize Carter. She was alive, but unresponsive, her vitals erratic. Scientists in hazmat suits scanned her, their faces pale as they whispered about unknown energy signatures and anomalous cellular degradation. Rains stood over her, watching as her lips twitched, still forming silent words. Solus approached, his voice low. "What the hell was that, Admiral? What did we just fight?" Rains didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments, Carter's words, the Dominion's collapse, the sudden emergence of these things. Whatever they weren't just a threat. They were a consequence. "We didn't just win a war," he said finally. "We broke something. Something older than the Dominion. Older than us." Solus frowned. "You think this is our fault?" "I think we kicked over a rock," Rains replied, "and something crawled out from underneath." The comms crackled. A transmission from the Terran High Council. "Admiral Rains," Chancellor Monroe's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. "We've lost contact with 3 more systems near Zelvaris 4. Reports of shadows. What's happening out there?" Rains exchanged a glance with Solus. Then he straightened, his resolve hardening. "We've got a new enemy, sir," he said, "and it's not one we can fight with railguns." Monroe's silence was heavy. Then, "What do you propose?" Rains looked at Carter, still whispering in her trance. He thought of the Dominion's fall, humanity's rise, and the cost they hadn't seen coming. "We find out what they are," he said. "We figure out how to stop them, and if we can't stop them, we make damn sure they regret waking up." Months later, the galaxy remained on edge. The Dominion was a memory, its worlds now under human stewardship. But the shadows lingered, a quiet menace spreading through uncharted space. Humanity adapted, as it always had. Fleets were refitted with experimental sensors to detect the entities. Scientists raced to understand the unknown energy signatures. Soldiers trained for a war no one could fully comprehend. And in a secure lab aboard the HSS Retribution, Major Carter awoke. Her eyes were her own again, but haunted. She spoke of endless voids, of voices that whispered from beyond time, of beings that had waited eons for a crack in the universe to slip through. "They're coming," she warned, "and they're not afraid of us." Rains stood beside her, his face etched with determination. "Good," he said, "because we're not afraid of them either." The war with the Dominion had ended, but humanity's true fight, for survival, for its place in the cosmos, had just begun. And whatever came next, they would face it as they always had, with fire, with cunning, and with an unyielding will to endure. The invaders came without warning. They arrived in silent, monstrous ships, blotting out the stars above humanity's outermost colonies. The Zalzareth, an empire that had crushed hundreds of civilizations beneath its clawed feet, assumed this war would be like all the others, a short, brutal extermination. They were wrong. The first colony fell within hours, its defenses shattered by orbital bombardment. The second fought longer, its militia desperately holding the line until their weapons overheated and their bodies gave out. The third was where things changed. New Avalon. A prosperous world, rich in resources and culture, it had no standing army, no warships, no defenses beyond a few police drones. When the Zalzareth landed, they expected frightened cattle. Instead, they found rage. The humans of New Avalon did not beg for mercy. They did not surrender. They fought tooth and nail, barricading streets, turning mining equipment into weapons, and rigging entire city blocks to explode. For 3 weeks, the Zalzareth slaughtered them by the thousands, their reptilian generals growing frustrated at the sheer stubbornness of their prey. The humans fought even as their cities burned, as their skies turned black with smoke. Yet it was never a question of if New Avalon would fall. Only when. But then, the skies darkened for another reason. At first, the Zalzareth thought it was an eclipse, a cosmic anomaly, something natural. Then the thunder came. The first orbital strike hit the Zalzareth command ship like a divine hammer. Its shields collapsed in an instant, and in the next, a blinding lance of energy split it in two. The ground beneath the invaders trembled as the air filled with sonic booms. The sky tore open, revealing monstrous black-armored warships descending from the heavens. The Dreadnoughts had arrived. Each one was a city of death, bristling with railguns the size of skyscrapers and missile bays that could reduce continents to rubble. Their hulls bore the scars of 100 wars, yet they moved with terrifying purpose. From their bellies, dropships poured out like swarming locusts, descending upon the ruined streets of New Avalon. And from those dropships came them, the Terran Marines. 8 feet tall in powered armor, their visors glowed with the cold, mechanical rage of their kind. Their weapons did not fire projectiles, they launched devastation. The Zalzareth, the conquerors of 1,000 worlds, finally felt what it was to be prey. They had believed humanity was weak, a fledgling race, barely out of their cradle. But they had forgotten one truth, one whispered legend among the few species who had survived war with mankind. If you strike at humanity, then God help you when their war machines arrive. And as the Dreadnoughts rained fire upon the invaders, as the Terran Marines crushed them beneath their boots, as the last surviving Zalzareth general screamed into the void for mercy. No one answered. Only death remained. The Zalzareth had never known fear like this. Their empire had conquered and annihilated over 100 species. They had burned planets, crushed rebellions, and turned entire civilizations into footnotes in history. But nothing had prepared them for humanity's wrath. New Avalon's ruins trembled as the Dreadnoughts opened fire from orbit, their mass drivers launching hypervelocity rounds that tore apart Zalzareth landing craft before they could flee. Any warships that attempted to escape were shredded by precision railgun fire. On the ground, the Terran Marines moved like specters of death. They advanced through the ruined streets with ruthless efficiency, their towering power armor built for destruction. Their weapons, each one more powerful than the heaviest ordnance in the Zalzareth arsenal, ripped through their enemies as if their vaunted armor was made of paper. A Zalzareth warrior, standing over 7 feet tall with scaled muscle honed for war, lunged at one of the human giants. It swung its plasma blade down, expecting to cleave through armor. The Marine barely flinched. He caught the alien's arm mid-strike, crushing bone and scale with one hand before driving his fist into its skull. The Zalzareth's head exploded in a spray of greenish blood. The others hesitated. The conquerors of 100 species hesitated. The Marine took a step forward, and in a voice that rumbled like a god's judgment, he spoke one word. "Run!" Panic spread through the Zalzareth forces like wildfire. Their commanders screamed at them to hold position, but it was useless. Their carefully planned invasion had turned into a nightmare. The humans were not fighting for territory. They were not even fighting for revenge. They were erasing them. A Zalzareth officer, one of the few still trying to maintain order, barked orders into his comms. "Send reinforcements! We need air support!" He never finished. A railgun round punched through his body, tearing him apart before detonating a plasma charge behind him. The entire street lit up in a blue fireball. Above, a Terran gunship swooped through the sky, its engines roaring. It rained death upon the fleeing aliens, autocannons shredding those who tried to escape the massacre. The Zalzareth fleet in orbit had already been crippled. Their invasion force was being butchered. And then, the final horror arrived. From the lead dreadnought, a transmission echoed across the battlefield. A voice. Cold. Calculated. Filled with the fury of a species that had been underestimated for too long. This is Admiral Elias Kane of the Terran Federation Navy. Your forces have invaded sovereign human space. You will receive no mercy. You will not be given the chance to retreat. You will burn. And then the exterminators deployed. These were not Marines. These were something else, something worse. 10 feet tall in exoskeletal armor, their weapons vaporized anything they touched. Their mere presence sent a cold terror through even the most battle-hardened Zalzareth warriors. They were the ones sent when humanity wanted a war to end. When the Zalzareth High Command received the footage, what little of it remained, they did something they had never done before. They ordered a full retreat, not a strategic withdrawal, not a regrouping maneuver. They fled. The Zalzareth Empire had learned too late. Some species cowered when invaded. Some surrendered. Humanity? Humanity didn't just fight back. They ended you. The Zalzareth forces tried to retreat. Tried. Their last remaining warships in orbit activated emergency jump drives, desperate to escape the massacre below. But the humans had anticipated this. Target their FTL drives, Admiral Kane commanded. No one leaves. From the Dreadnoughts, beams of concentrated energy lanced through the darkness. Zalzareth ships, already battered and burning, had their engines carved out like tumors. Their escape routes became death traps, their desperate attempts to flee turning into slow, agonizing destruction as human warships picked them apart. One after another, the Zalzareth vessels exploded, their debris joining the graveyard of ships now orbiting New Avalon. For the first time in their history, the Zalzareth had encountered an enemy that did not simply repel them. Humanity didn't just win wars. They erased the concept of their enemy's victory from existence. But the worst was yet to come. The exterminators marched through the city ruins, their armor gleaming under the firelit sky. They did not speak. They did not take prisoners. They only hunted. A surviving Zalzareth officer, one of the few who had managed to regroup, hid behind a crumbling building, watching in horror. His warriors, once proud conquerors, now scrambled like vermin, gunned down one by one. A nearby comrade, a younger warrior, trembled. "Commander, what do we do?" The officer swallowed, his throat dry. "We surrender." The words tasted like ash. His people had never surrendered before. It was unthinkable, unacceptable. But as he watched a single exterminator tear through a Zalzareth heavy unit with his bare hands, ripping its reinforced armor open like paper, he knew they had no choice. He activated his communicator, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Commander Zora of the Zalzareth invasion fleet. We surrender." "We surrender!" The battlefield fell silent. The remaining Zalzareth forces dropped their weapons, kneeling on shattered streets, hands raised. For a brief moment, hope flickered in the commander's heart. Perhaps the humans would show mercy. Then the reply came. It was not Admiral Kane who responded. It was a woman's voice, cold, calm, and merciless. "Surrender?" A pause. "No." And then the exterminators opened fire. They didn't hesitate. They didn't stop. They executed the Zalzareth with terrifying efficiency. No survivors, no prisoners, no chance. Commander Zora barely had time to scream before a plasma round vaporized his skull. The last of the invaders died choking on their own blood, their bodies left where they fell. New Avalon was stained green with Zalzareth blood, and humanity did not mourn them. This wasn't just revenge. This was a message. Days later, the Zalzareth homeworld received the transmission. Their emperor, once feared across the stars, watched in horror as Admiral Kane's face appeared on the screen. "This was your only warning," he said. "You came to our worlds, you slaughtered our people, and now you know the cost." Behind him, footage of the extermination played. Zalzareth bodies, burned and broken, their warships reduced to drifting wrecks, their warriors, mighty conquerors, hunted like animals. Admiral Kane leaned forward, his gaze like a blade. "If you so much as breathe in the direction of humanity again, we will not stop at your fleet. We will come for your worlds, we will come for your cities, and we will turn your entire species into a memory." The transmission cut. Silence fell in the Zalzareth war room. The Emperor, a being who had once commanded the death of billions without hesitation, trembled. For the first time in their empire's history, they knew fear. And across the galaxy, whispers spread among alien nations. The humans, the species once ignored as weak, had proven something terrifying. They were not just survivors. They were the monsters that nightmares feared. The Zalzareth Empire teetered on the edge of collapse. News of the massacre at New Avalon spread faster than any official announcement. The sheer brutality of humanity's response sent shockwaves through the Empire's war councils. Entire fleets went silent. Generals refused orders. The Emperor himself had retreated into isolation, his advisors whispering of unprecedented surrender negotiations, an act that had never been considered in Zalzareth history. But it wasn't just the Zalzareth who were watching. Across the galaxy, other empires, many of them once salivating at the thought of carving up humanity's colonies for themselves, suddenly found themselves rethinking their ambitions. The Varathi Dominion, whose insectoid warriors had long prided themselves on their insatiable expansion, abruptly withdrew their border fleets from human space. The Kalath Syndicate, a crime empire that had trafficked in human slaves for years, suddenly ceased all human trade overnight. Their stations quietly vanished from known space, their leaders going into hiding. Even the Seraphi Concordat, an advanced, isolationist race that had long deemed humanity too primitive for diplomacy, opened communication channels with the Terran Federation for the first time in history. One thing was clear: the humans had changed the rules. But humanity wasn't finished. Admiral Kane stood aboard the bridge of the TFS Judicator, his flagship Dreadnought, as the final reports from New Avalon scrolled across his display. 0 Zalzareth survivors, 0 human civilian casualties post-liberation, 0 enemy warships allowed to escape, a perfect, absolute victory. He had made his message clear. Humanity would not be prey, not now, not ever again. But now, there was a decision to make. Behind him, Grand Strategist Vera Lynn, one of the most feared tacticians in the Federation, spoke coldly. "We should finish them." Kane turned to her. "They're already broken." Lynn's expression remained unreadable. "Not broken enough. Their Emperor still breathes. Their fleet, though wounded, still exists. If we stop now, in a century, maybe 2, they might return." She leaned in. "Or we could ensure they never do." There was no hesitation in her voice, no cruelty, just pragmatism. Kane exhaled. He had known this was coming, knew the War Council would demand total extermination, and part of him agreed. But another part, buried deep, wondered if this was the line, the moment where humanity crossed into something else. The Zalzareth had made their choice when they invaded. They had sought to exterminate humanity. Now humanity had to decide. Would they simply defeat their enemies, or would they become something far worse? Kane turned to the holomap, where the Zalzareth homeworld gleamed in the darkness like a ripe fruit waiting to be crushed. One order, one command, and an empire would cease to exist. And all across the bridge, his officers awaited his decision. Would humanity's vengeance end here? Or would the skies above the Zalzareth homeworld darken next? Kane took a breath. Then he gave the order. The bridge of the TFS Judicator was silent. The weight of history hung heavy in the air as Admiral Kane's voice echoed through the command deck. "Deploy the fleet. We end this." Across the vastness of space, the Terran Federation's war machine roared to life. Hundreds of ships, dreadnoughts, battleships, destroyers, formed up in perfect precision, their massive engines burning like dying stars. At the heart of the formation, three of humanity's most terrifying weapons loomed. The Purifiers. They were not ships. They were judgment given form. Colossal mobile weapons platforms designed for planetary annihilation. They carried no troops, no diplomats, no terms of surrender. They carried hellfire, and they were heading straight for the Zalzareth homeworld. On Zalzar, the capital world of the Zalzareth Empire, the panic had reached its peak. The Emperor sat frozen on his throne, staring at the reports flooding in. Human ships approaching. All attempts at negotiation ignored. Orbital defenses prepared, but projected survival time, less than 1 hour. The Empire's mighty fleets were gone. Their warriors, the conquerors of 100 civilizations, had been turned to ash. And now, the humans were coming for the heart. The Emperor turned to his war council. "What do we do?" The words tasted of fear, a fear no Zalzareth had ever known. No one answered, because there was nothing left to do. The human fleet arrived. Zalzar's orbital defenses opened fire the moment they appeared, a desperate last stand. The sky burned as anti-ship cannons unleashed torrents of plasma and kinetic rounds. Defense platforms rained nuclear-tipped missiles into the void. It didn't matter. Humanity had seen this before. For every shot fired, the Terran warships retaliated with 1,000. Dreadnought railguns shredded orbital stations before they could even lock onto a target. Swarms of drone bombers weaved through the chaos, reducing planetary defenses to smoldering craters. And then, the Purifiers entered position. A silence fell over the battlefield. Even the Zalzareth defenders, those still alive, paused in horror. They had heard rumors, tales of planets reduced to cinders by human weapons. But surely even the humans wouldn't do this. And then came the transmission. Admiral Kane, staring down at the planet, his voice final and absolute. "This is the price." The Purifiers fired. The first impact shattered continents. A wave of energy unlike anything the Zalzareth had ever seen erupted across their homeworld. Entire cities, once shining beacons of their empire, were vaporized in an instant. Oceans boiled into the sky, turning the atmosphere into a choking, burning wasteland. The Emperor, watching from his palace, saw his people burning in the streets, screaming, running, falling, and then the second blast hit. Zalzar cracked. The very planet shook as tectonic plates split apart. Massive firestorms swept across the ruins of the Empire's greatest civilization. Those who had once been masters of the galaxy now choked on their own ashes. By the time the third Purifier fired, Zalzar was no longer a world. It was a grave. The war was over. The Zalzareth were no more. Not just their fleets, not just their warriors, their species. The Terran fleet remained in orbit for a moment longer, watching as the fires raged on what was once a homeworld. There were no celebrations, no cheers, only silence. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Judicator, staring at the broken world below. His hands gripped the railing. His officers waited for his word. He gave none, because for all the righteousness of their cause, for all the justifications and vengeance, something dark had stirred in the soul of humanity that day, and the galaxy had felt it. For the first time in history, the other empires no longer saw humans as another species to dominate. They saw them for what they truly were, a species that did not forgive, a species that did not forget, a species that, when wronged, would burn entire civilizations to the ground. And somewhere, in the void, as the Terran fleet turned away from the ruined world behind them, the galaxy whispered in fear. Humanity had arrived, and they would never be underestimated again. The galaxy would never be the same again. For weeks after the fall of the Zalzarith, an eerie silence hung over known space. No empire dared speak, no fleet dared move. The great powers that had once schemed and plotted over human colonies now waited, watching for what humanity would do next. The Varathi Dominion, whose warriors had once boasted of breaking human bones for sport, closed their borders overnight. The Kalath Syndicate, once thriving on human trafficking, purged every record of their dealings and quietly withdrew from the galactic stage. The mighty Seraphi Concordat, who had dismissed humanity as a primitive species unworthy of diplomacy, now sent envoys to Earth, hoping, praying, to establish peace before it was too late. But humanity did not answer. Humanity was silent, and that silence was worse than any war. On Earth, the leaders of the Terran Federation gathered in secret. A war had been won, a species had been erased, and now a question hung over the highest ranks of the Federation, a question no one dared ask aloud. What are we now? Admiral Kane sat in the war room, staring at the star map before him. Zalzarith space, once a vast, proud empire, was now a void. No signals, no transmissions, just darkness. Across the table, Grand Strategist Vera Lynn broke the silence. The Varathi are next. Kane didn't react. Lynn leaned forward, her voice measured, calculated. They were the first to test us. They enslaved our people. They burned our colonies. They cheered as our ships were destroyed. Now they're afraid. They've retreated. But fear fades. Memories fade. She locked eyes with Kane. If we stop here, if we let them recover, we'll fight this war again in 100 years. Kane's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He had given the order to wipe out the Zalzarith. He had watched as their homeworld burned, as their cities crumbled to nothing. He had made humanity's message clear. But now it was different. The Varathi were not the Zalzarith. They had not invaded Earth. They had not burned New Avalon. They had enslaved humans, yes. They had fought against human colonies, yes. But they had never declared total war. Destroying them would not be vengeance. It would be conquest. And Kane wasn't sure if humanity was ready for that. Or worse, if they already were. He exhaled and stood. No. The word cut through the room like a blade. Lynn raised an eyebrow. No? Kane met her gaze. The war is over. We won. We don't need to become what they feared we were. Silence. Then a voice from the shadows. And what if we already have? All eyes turned to the doorway. A man stepped forward, tall, severe, his uniform black with no insignia. Director Elias Crow, the head of the Terran Intelligence Directorate, the man who had orchestrated the human response from the shadows. Crow stepped into the light, his eyes cold. You think the war is over? He let out a dry chuckle. No, Admiral. It has only just begun. Kane frowned. Explain. Crow turned to the star map, tapping a few controls. The image shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just Varathi space, or Kalath Syndicate space, or Seraphi space. It was the entire galaxy. Highlighted in red, spanning hundreds of systems, was something Kane had never seen before. What is this? Kane asked, his voice low. Crow's lips curled into something resembling a smile. The truth, he said. This is what no one told you, Admiral. This is what the politicians were too afraid to reveal. This is why we were never supposed to stop at the Zalzareth. Kane's jaw tightened. What the hell are you talking about? Crow stepped forward, his voice turning razor-sharp. You thought the Zalzareth were the enemy. You thought the Varathi were a threat. But they're nothing. They're just players in a game much larger than you imagined. He zoomed in. A black zone appeared at the edge of the galactic map. A place with no recorded history, no known empires. Just silence. Kane narrowed his eyes. What is that? Crow exhaled. The ones who are coming. A chill ran through the room. Even Lynn, ever composed, stiffened slightly. Kane folded his arms. Who? Crow's voice was grim. The Architects. The name sent a ripple of unease through the War Council. Kane had never heard it before, but the way the others reacted told him they had. He took a step forward. Explain. Crow's expression hardened. You think we won, Admiral, but we were never fighting for survival. He zoomed the map out further. More black zones appeared. Dozens, hundreds, entire sectors of the galaxy, empty, silent, dead. Crow's voice dropped to a whisper. We weren't fighting to live. We were fighting to prove we were worthy of it. The room went cold. Kane clenched his fists. Worthy of what? Crow turned to face him. Of existing. The silence was suffocating, and then the alarms blared. Kane turned to the holoscreen just as the message came through. Unidentified objects detected on the galactic rim. Massive energy signatures inbound. First contact imminent. Crow exhaled. They're here. Kane's blood ran cold, because in the depths of space, beyond the ruins of the Zalzareth, something was coming. And this time, humanity wasn't fighting for revenge. They were fighting to survive. The Judicator's bridge was bathed in red light. Warning sirens screamed as incoming reports flooded the main holoscreen. Kane's mind raced as he took in the data. Unknown ships, unknown energy signatures. Every single reading was beyond anything recorded in known space. They weren't Varathi. They weren't Kalath. They weren't Seraphi. And worst of all, they weren't stopping. Kane turned to his comm officer. How far are they? 5 light-years out. They're not using FTL. Whatever they're doing, it's something else. Something faster. Kane's gut twisted. No empire had tech beyond the Terran Federation's FTL network. Not even the Seraphi, who had ruled the stars for millennia. Something faster than FTL? God help us. Crow stepped beside him, watching the screen with an unsettling calm. This is it. Kane clenched his jaw. You knew this was coming. Crow didn't deny it. We had suspicions. Kane turned sharply. And you didn't think we should have been informed? Crow met his glare with unreadable eyes. Would it have changed anything? Kane's fists tightened. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to grab Crow by the throat and demand why he had kept this secret. Why he had let them believe humanity was the apex predator of the stars when, all along, something else had been lurking. But there was no time for that now. Kane turned back to the holoscreen. Get me a visual. The sensor tech hesitated. Sir, we're receiving some strange interference. Kane's stomach twisted. Define strange. The tech swallowed. It's not blocking us. It's showing us something. The main screen flickered, and then it appeared. A transmission. Not words, not a message. A memory. Projected in eerie, crystalline clarity, a ruined galaxy. Stars burned out. Planets cracked open like eggs. Entire sectors of space ripped apart by forces beyond comprehension. A voice, cold, distant, inhuman, whispered through the bridge. "You are young." The crew shuddered. Some clutched their heads as if something was pressing into their skulls. Kane grit his teeth as he forced himself to listen. "You are reckless." The image shifted. Humanity's fleets. The war against the Zalzareth. The burning of their homeworld. The death. The silence. "You have proven your strength. You have proven your wrath." Another flicker. An image of Earth, of every human colony, millions, billions of lives. "Now you will prove your worth." The screen went black. Kane's breathing was heavy. His heart pounded in his ears. He had never felt fear like this before. The comm officer looked up, pale as death. "Sir, they're here." Kane turned slowly towards the viewport, and then he saw them. The ships were massive, monolithic, impossible. They moved without propulsion, without engines, without anything that should have allowed them to exist. And yet they were there. Hundreds, no, thousands, a fleet that made even the purifiers look like toys. Kane took a slow step forward. His voice was a whisper. "My God." And then the largest of the ships, easily the size of a planet, began to open. Not like a hatch, not like a bay, like a mouth, a hungry, endless void. And Kane realized in that moment what the message had meant. This was not war. This was judgment. The architects had come, and humanity's true test had just begun. The silence before the storm was the worst part. Kane could feel it pressing against his skull, a silence that wasn't truly silence, as if something was watching, waiting, judging. Every breath he took felt heavier, like the very air had been weighed down by the presence of these things. The architects. That was what Crow had called them, a name spoken in hushed whispers in the deepest corridors of intelligence networks, a name that had never been recorded, never been acknowledged, because to acknowledge them meant accepting a terrible truth, that humanity was not at the top of the food chain, that there were forces out there, beyond empires, beyond gods. And now, those forces had come. Kane turned sharply to his tactical officer. "Status on the fleet?" The man was pale, but held his composure. "Dreadnoughts holding formation. Escort squadron standing by. We are combat ready, sir." Kane exhaled. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Nothing could be combat ready for what loomed before them. "All ships, raise shields. Do not fire unless fired upon." A quiet nod from the officer. The order rippled across the fleet. Thousands of warships, the greatest force humanity had ever assembled, held their position against something unknowable. The architects' fleet hung in the void, utterly silent. Their ships had no lights, no exhaust, no identifiable structure. They were shapes in the dark, as if they had been carved from the void itself. And then, a message, not sound, not transmission, something deeper, something that slipped into their minds like a whisper in a dream. "One will answer." Kane felt the words more than he heard them. They coiled through his thoughts, their meaning absolute. Lynn stiffened beside him. "They want an envoy." Kane exhaled slowly. He had known this moment was coming the second he had seen those ships. The architects were not here for war. Not yet. They were here to speak. And if the wrong words were spoken, if the wrong step was taken, this would end before it even began. Kane adjusted his uniform, straightened his posture, and took a deep breath. Patch me through. The bridge crew hesitated. No one wanted to be the one to do it. But after a few tense seconds, the comm officer swallowed hard and activated the transmission. The moment the connection was established, the world fell away. Kane was no longer on the bridge of the Judicator. He was somewhere else, floating, suspended, an endless expanse of shifting colors, light and darkness twining together in an impossible cosmic dance. And in the distance, so far yet impossibly near, they stood. Shapes, towering, silent, watching, the architects. Kane felt their presence wrap around him, their voices slipping into his mind, brushing against his thoughts like ancient fingers. You have been weighed, measured, tested. You have burned, you have slaughtered, you have taken the stars and claimed them as your own. The visions came in a flood. The war against the Zalzareth, the purge of New Avalon, the ashes of civilizations left in humanity's wake. Kane clenched his fists. His mind screamed, but his body, if he even had one in this place, remained still. Do you understand what you are? Kane forced himself to breathe, and then, slowly, he spoke. We are survivors. The architects shifted, not in motion, not in shape, something deeper, and then survive. The visions ended. Kane slammed back into his own body on the bridge, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. His crew was shouting, their voices frantic. The architect's fleet was moving, but not forward. Away. Slowly, silently, as if retreating into the void from which they had come. The crew stood frozen, watching as the impossible warships vanished one by one. Kane let out a shuddering breath. We live. For now. But deep in his gut, he knew this was not the end. The architects had come not to destroy, but to see, to watch, to judge. And one day, they would return. And when they did, humanity would face a final test, a test that would decide whether they ruled the stars, or vanished into the dark like all the others before them. The war was over, but the game had just begun.